My founder and chair, my boss, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, says we have no plan B because there is no planet B. So the Ban Ki-moon Foundation was chaired and founded by the former UN Secretary General, the 8th Secretary General at the UN, Ban Ki-moon, a Korean diplomat. We continue his legacy on two international agreements for which he's probably best known for, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. What's at stake for us is realizing if we don't adapt some type of global citizenship mindset, we're going to continue to operate in our boats in a very siloed way that makes these inequities continue.
Welcome to Opportunity Miami. My name is Roderick Miller, and today we're glad to have with us Kate Landon, the Executive Director of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about Ban Ki-moon and the Ban Ki-moon Foundation? What is it that you do?
So the Ban Ki-moon Foundation was chaired and founded by the former UN Secretary General, the 8th Secretary General at the UN, Ban Ki-moon, a Korean diplomat who made his way to New York a couple decades ago. At the foundation, we continue his legacy on two international agreements for which he's probably best known for, the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm wearing a pin on my lapel today, as you are as well. Thank you for that. And the Paris Climate Agreement. So when he left the UN, he knew, like many sort of high-profile people, he needed a vehicle to continue his advocacy outside of that very public day job he had for a number of years. And so hence, he created a network of offices around the world to do this work. We have a sister office based out of Vienna, Austria, which is a quasi-governmental organization advancing this work in Europe and Africa and other places, as well as a sister office in Seoul, Korea, where he's still based. It's his home country. And then our office was launched in New York in 2022 to continue the work in the Americas and mobilize U.S. stakeholders in particular around this mission.
Congratulations. It looks like you guys haven't stopped moving since you've been running.
No, absolutely not, which is why when I was invited to come down to Miami to talk to you all and other stakeholders aligned with Miami Climate Week, we were really excited to jump on that.
That's great. Let's get into it. So climate equity, tackling poverty, addressing systemic inequalities, these are all part of the broader ambitions of the foundation. And they're really a tall order on a global scale. How does the foundation really bridge the gap, when there's such massive collaboration funding and that's required for this work?
Yeah. So when I was brought on, we did a landscape study to figure out how we could add value to the work already being done by our sister offices in Vienna and out of Seoul. And we knew that we really had an opportunity, considering all of these intersectional issues of climate, of poverty, of health that really came to a head during the pandemic, to think uniquely how to address them as a public foundation right in New York. And so we decided we wanted to lean boldly into this mantra of mobilizing leadership for the SDGs and really analyze, where does this leadership lie, where does it need to lie, where is it underinvested? And so we realized we had an opportunity, leveraging our convening platform with the former Secretary General and his broad network, to both mobilize leaders at the Grasstops, as we say, as well as the Grassroots, and be a convening and bridge-building institution between those two voices and opinions, and realizing that we needed to invest in leadership, ethical leadership, on both sides of that spectrum, right, and bring them closer together for intergenerational dialogue and collaboration. And so we have a couple of tools in our tool belt as a public foundation that we leverage. We have a body of work around education and advocacy, so mobilizing finance for the SDGs. If you look at the data, it clearly shows that globally we are on track to achieve less than 20% of the nearly 200 targets and indicators represented in this robust agenda. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Luckily, leading up to the pandemic, between 2015, when the agenda was launched, into 2020, some progress had been made on things around, child mortality, some health indicators, et cetera. A lot of that came to a halt during the pandemic. And since then, we've even backslid a bit across many countries, not just in the global south, but in the global north as well. And so we realized a lot of this had to do with financing and wanting to promote more innovative, collaborative funding models between the private sector, private philanthropy, government, et cetera. So we do convening, social media campaigns to broker these types of partnerships and to urge more financing across multiple institutions. We also do that, from New York at the UN itself, within the UN ecosystem, taking advantage of the major philanthropic institutions we have access to, all of the big private philanthropies, family foundations, family offices that exist in New York, as well as the hub that is the private sector in New York and throughout the US. Our other body of work is leadership development. So also building upon the legacy of Ban Ki-moon, if you know him, he's a massive champion for the leadership of women and youth. He was behind the creation of UN Women as it exists. At the UN currently, bringing together 4 different units that previously were trying to tackle disparate parts of this topic of women's leadership and gender equity, brought them under one umbrella unit. And so we are very committed to building pipelines of leadership from the grassroots of women and youth local leaders who we know are already the backbone of civil society, whether we're talking about here, in New York, where I'm from, down here in Miami, in Colombia, in sub-Saharan Africa, where we also work, getting them capacitated, better equipped to be able to bring their advocacy agendas into these global convening spaces or into national conferences. And then we do grant making as a foundation. So we are often an early funder, a first funder for startup ventures led by women and youth social entrepreneurs in their communities, doing work aligned with the SDGs. And so we've launched a fund in sub-Saharan Africa, providing grants and technical assistance support for them. And we're currently working to bring that model to other parts of the world, including Latin America and the Caribbean.
And that's a lot of work.
Yes.
So walk us through a couple of examples of some specific projects that you're really proud of.
Great. So one I have to mention is our work when we talk about leadership development and we think about women and youth and whose leadership do we want to invest in. We realized we had an opportunity in North America in particular to work and focus on Native American and Indigenous youth. And so we have an initiative to build their advocacy power in these global decision-making spaces. They often report to us that, even when they are invited, say, for example, to the UN or to private philanthropic conferences, they're not sure how to navigate those very complex spaces, or they're not even given equal access as other youth to be able to weigh in and voice their opinion on certain policies. So we've launched a fund. We're going to be providing grants, again, to help get them into these spaces, and then using our advocacy and convening power to back their advocacy agendas. I'm also very excited about our cross-sector leadership committee that we've launched here in the U.S., where we're working with industry leaders to sort of weigh in on their perspective on how we can move the needle on the SDGs. So we currently have representatives from private philanthropy, from finance, and I'd love to talk to stakeholders down here in Miami about joining our efforts as well. The last one I have to mention is our work with U.S.-based high school and college students, training them, working with them, of understanding how to use the SDGs as a policy framework for social change, regardless of what career path they want to go in. As you know, I don't have to explain it to you, a framework like this where we're looking intersectionally at climate, education, health, economic development, and how all of these things are interconnected. This is something that's applicable, I believe, to young people, regardless whether they want to go into business, academia. And so we're bringing this curriculum to the schools, we're bringing this curriculum to NGOs, and we realize, young people, we don't have to explain the theory behind this too much. They live these realities every day. They see these issues in their communities. They have the fire in them to make a difference in their communities, and we're just trying to give them that little boost and open up doors to bigger and better opportunities building upon that.
That's what really gives us hope, right? Mm-hmm. This generation really gets why this matters. Mm-hmm. You said something earlier that I want you to kind of double click on, if you will, sure. Which is you talked about that we're not on track in terms of 20% of the, not even to hit 20% of the goals. So what does that mean, us not hitting those goals? What's at stake here?
Well, as my founder and chair, my boss, Mr. Ban Ki-moon says, we have no plan B because there is no planet B, right? And so we use it as a sort of a clarion call for why we have to act now, why we have to step out of our silos and think differently. And he very, very clearly says that, every day leaders, too many leaders of institutions wake up with blinders on, with a very siloed view of themselves in the world. And he really wishes people would expand that a bit and see themselves not just as, accountable to their own industries, accountable to their own country or to their own city, but accountable to the world, accountable to the sense of global citizenship. So that's a value and an ethos that drives everything we do. I think what's at stake for us is realizing if we don't adapt some type of global citizenship mindset, we're going to continue to operate in our boats in a very siloed way that makes these inequities, continue. One thing I'm really excited about is seeing, I have to name this, coming from New York, seeing the opportunities for partnership with the lovely people of Miami. We're very different cities, but we also have a lot in common as international hubs in our own right. As leaders in commerce, we're both dealing with, also up in New York, issues of heat, of rising seawaters in the northeast coast, but also a surge in economic interest in tech, right? And I think those are some really interesting opportunities for us to consider collaboration between young people, between business in both places.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we often say is we believe that the challenges of climate, risk and resilience is our greatest existential challenge and arguably our biggest economic opportunity.
Yeah.
What are the economic opportunities you're seeing in terms of the blue and green economy?
Well, I would go back to our focus on young people and making sure young people, whether in two-year degree programs, four-year degree programs, have the tools needed to go into the green economy space to be part of this just transition. So whether it's making more startup funding available for them, more degree programs, both in traditional and non-traditional settings on how to use AI, for good. We know there's a lot of interest among young people to leverage AI as part of their startup businesses, but we also know that the data within AI is only good as what we feed into it. So I think whether we take it from a social science point of view, a hard science point of view, all of these skill sets can be brought together to invest in economic opportunity within climate.
Last question. I always ask this question. So I run the Miami-Dade Beacon Council. Yes. The Beacon Council has the responsibility of driving private investment, creating jobs, those sorts of things. If you were in my role, given your mandate, what would you be doing?
Wow. I would find ways to bring podcast formats like this to not just executive directors of foundations like myself, but also to young people on the front lines of change in their communities. I'd love to see what they might say in answering these same questions, because I'd like to be held accountable as well, right, to the stances that I take. I'd also love to see partnership with private philanthropy, family foundations, large private foundations, not just based here in Miami and South Florida, but globally. There's a lot of interest, I think, in New York, private philanthropic money, as well, to figure out how they can partner with local private sector leaders and solutions on the ground here, understanding how we're all connected even across this eastern seaboard. So I would say invite us to conferences. I'm happy to bring a delegation of people from New York down here to learn and partner with you. Now I'd like to ask you a question. Okay. What do you see working from your vantage point and these intersecting issues of climate and sustainability in Miami?
Well, Miami, we really feel like we're ground zero for climate change and climate action. Every time it rains, it floods, in some part of the city. We've got, big parts of the county that are still on septic. We have tremendous challenges, but we believe that we should be a laboratory for solutions that work. So whether it's the work that we're doing around the concrete that's pulling the CO2 out of the air, or things that we're doing to prevent further erosion of our coast, these are things that are vitally important to us here in Miami. We've got a risk and resilience hub that's been funded by the federal government, and we've brought together over 100 different companies, our academic partners, nonprofits, and everybody's got this singular goal. How do we actually make this place more livable, more sustainable? And what we know is that there's not one entity that can do it alone. And so I think what's clear in Miami, and it's not a political issue for us, it's a life issue. We want to live, and we want to live well. We want people to live here and enjoy what we have here in South Florida. So we know that in order for us to do that, we've got to work together. We believe that we can create tens of thousands of jobs over the next decade in this space. And we believe that if we can solve these challenges here, we can export that not only to the rest of the U.S., but to the rest of the world and the Caribbean. And so we're forging partnerships right here out of Miami. We're forging partnerships with countries in Latin America and the Caribbean around this work. We're working with our local universities. And what we know is that we, by nature, can solve anything that we want to if we really want to. And so we believe that we're at a critical point where we can start to do this. And it's especially critical right now, where it seems like the sense of urgency has waned a little bit in the kind of the national context, but we know that we can't let up. Are you seeing that sense of urgency?
No, absolutely, and I love what you just said about that, is that you are not waiting for somebody to come and tell you to get moving, right? You are already moving in your own way. Yeah. And oftentimes I think politics gets imposed on us, right?
Absolutely.
But we're everyday people waking up, finding solutions with our neighbors. And at the end of the day, that's what's driving us. And I think it's that energy and love for ourselves and our neighbors is that what what makes these types of community building activities possible. So I think what you're doing has tremendous implications, not just for South Florida, but for the entirety of the U.S. I'd love to see more hubs like this be able to come together in other major metropolitan areas and even other parts of the world. So there's a way that we can help amplify what you're doing down here in Miami into these other spaces where they can learn from you and bring that, that spirit of South Florida as well to this work. We'd love to help you do that.